We're of the view that any organization succeeds to the degree to which each individual in the organization gives unconditionally in pursuit of the organization's objectives. It is the degree to which the average individual works willingly, is there to give rather than take, is the degree to which groups succeed. And we have a thought experiment that helps demonstrate the case. We call it the three bakers analogy. So let's assume we have these three bakers who kind of collaborate to bake a cake. It takes them a whole month to bake this cake. At the end of the month, the cake is sold, and each baker takes a slice home to feed their family. Clearly, there'll be a slice left, and that slice you would either call a surplus if it was a cooperative, or profit if it was a capitalist company. But the point about this is that surplus or profit, which is the measure of the success of the enterprise, only exists because the total cake that was baked was bigger than what each individual took home. Collectively, these people gave more than what they took. And this intent to give, in the first instance, in organizations, is expressed in how people treat each other in peer groups, or in teams, if you like. And if you consider any successful team, like a successful soccer team, then surely most of the work that happens on the field is not about somebody scoring. It's about somebody trying to set somebody else up to score. In other words, what the player who's trying to set his colleague up to score is saying to his colleague, I'm quite happy for you to be the star. I don't necessarily have to be the star myself. In fact, when people play in such a way that everybody's trying to be the star themselves, you no longer have a team. You've got a herd of cats, which really does suggest that teams succeed when the members are there to set each other up to succeed. And you can kind of measure, if you like, the success or the cohesiveness of the team on the basis of the maturation of each individual concerned. So if you consider any group of freestanding group of individuals and ask yourself, well, how does this freestanding group over a period of time operate like a team? Then the first variable you have to bear in mind is the maturation of each individual from the intent to take to the intent to give over a period of time. And then also you need to consider what's seen to be significant. So what happens over a period of time as people mature is that they operate less and less as individuals, freestanding individuals, and they're more and more willing to subordinate their own interests to the requirements of the team. They operate as members of the team and not just as freestanding individuals. And what then the effect on the group then is that over a period of time, the group operates less and less as just a freestanding group of individuals and more as a team that has connectivity. That sense of connectivity is therefore the product of how the individuals in the group mature. As each individual matures, the team, if you like, gets more and more connected with each other because each individual is operating more as a member and less as an individual. It is that connectiveness of the team which actually eventually produces a whole which is bigger than the sum of the parts. Now, I think there are, if you wanted to account for how this happens, there are three conditions that account for this. The first is cultural. There's some cultures in the world that are just far better at developing collaborative sort of people than others. A case in mind would be the Swedes. I mean, if you think about famous Swedish brands, for example, then you would include a really long list. Organizations like Scania, Saab, SKF, Volvo, Ericsson, H&M, Spotify, Atlas Copco. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And if you consider that this country only has 10 million people in it, then it's actually quite a remarkable achievement, this massive contribution that these people have made to the world. And if you ask yourself why, well, actually what's really apparent to me is that what the Swedes do really well is collaboration. The sort of behavior that as a South African I would find completely acceptable. Make sure in the meeting you've got your voice is carried sway. You've put the opposition down. You've won at the argument. That kind of behavior in a Swedish organization is just not acceptable, precisely because there's this emphasis on collaboration and on consensus. A very similar culture is the case of the Japanese. Japanese people are kind of schooled to understand that they're there for something bigger than themselves. It is not, for instance, it's not remarkable, for instance, that a janitor on a bullet train would bow at the train as the train comes into the station. In fact, what's interesting, in Japanese school, there is no janitorial staff. The students clean their own bathrooms. So Japanese people are brought up from when they're very young to know that they're there to make a contribution. The second variable that accounts for this kind of collaborative spirit and being there to set my colleague up to succeed is the intent of the organization. That the organization has what you could call a benevolent intent. And what we mean by benevolent intent is that the intent of the organization is worthy going the extra mile for. And again, a thought experiment would suffice to make the point. If you worked for a pharmaceutical factory that produced a miracle cure for tuberculosis, and your boss came to you one day and said to you, work very hard at making these drugs, because if you do, you would help to make a shareholder on the stock exchange shamefully rich, you would be very angry. I mean, you wouldn't want to work for this person. But if the same boss came to you and said, work very hard at making these drugs, because if you do, you'll help to save millions of lives around the world, you'll be far happier to work for this boss. Now, the difference between the first and the second statement is that the first statement makes you feel used. The second statement makes you feel like you're making some sort of a contribution. And that's exactly our point. You can't ask people to go the extra mile if you don't give them a reason which is noble enough for them to suspend their self-interest. The third variable, and it's actually the most profound variable that accounts for this possibility of people being there to go the extra mile, is how the group is led. If you really want to understand the conditions under which people are going to act for reasons that are bigger than their self-interest, then you've got to ask yourself, who's the boss? People go the extra mile for people. It is not organizations that account for this intent. It is really how the organization is led.